Welcome to Mystery at 221B, where Sherlock Holmes' secrets come to life.
A scream shattered the silence of Ravenstone Hall. A cry so piercing it seemed to claw through the Dartmoor mist and echo off the manor's blackened stones. Was it a warning or a plea for help? In the heart of this decaying Elizabethan estate, where secrets fester like rot, Sherlock Holmes and Captain Hastings step into a labyrinth of deceit. A young heir has vanished without a trace, a maid lies dead under mysterious circumstances, and whispers of a demon of the ruins haunt the shadows. What dark truth binds this cursed family? And who among them, friend, foe, or faithful servant, hides a killer's heart? As the fog thickens, one question burns. Will Holmes unravel the mystery before the demon claims another soul? Chapter 1. The Shadow over Ravenstone Hall. The autumn of 1926 had draped the English countryside in a sombre cloak of mist and russet leaves, and nowhere did the season's melancholy settle more heavily than upon Ravenstone Hall, a sprawling Elizabethan manor nestled in the remote folds of Dartmoor. The hall, with its blackened stone facade and mullioned windows, stood as a monument to both grandeur and decay, its towers clawing at the fog like the fingers of a forgotten giant. To Captain Arthur Hastings, who had accompanied Sherlock Holmes on this peculiar journey, the place exuded an air of disquiet, as though the very walls whispered secrets too grim to be uttered aloud. The invitation had come unexpectedly, as such things often did with Holmes. A letter, penned in a precise yet tremulous hand, had arrived at our London lodgings 3 days prior, bearing the crest of the Wycliffe family. Sir Reginald Wycliffe, the aging patriarch of Ravenstone Hall, had written to Holmes with a plea for assistance, though the details were maddeningly vague. "A shadow hangs over my house," the letter read, "a shadow that threatens to destroy us all. I implore you, Monsieur Holmes, to lend your singular talents to our aid." Holmes, ever intrigued by the obscure, had accepted without hesitation, and so we found ourselves rattling along the winding lanes of Devonshire in a hired motor car, the engines hum a poor defense against the oppressive silence of the moor. As we approached the hall, the mist parted briefly to reveal its imposing silhouette. The structure seemed to crouch upon the landscape, its chimneys jagged against the grey sky. Hastings, whose imagination was prone to flights of unease, could not shake the sense that the house itself was watching them. "I say, Holmes," he ventured, gripping the edge of his seat as the car lurched over a rut. "This place has a rather grim aspect, don't you think? Like something out of one of those Gothic novels Mrs. Hudson is so fond of." Holmes, seated beside him, his sharp profile etched against the window, gave a faint smile. "You are too susceptible to atmosphere, my dear Hastings. A house is merely stone and mortar, incapable of malice. It is the minds within that give it character, and it is those minds I intend to study." His grey eyes, keen as ever, flickered with that peculiar light that signaled his intellect was already at work, sifting through unseen threads. The car drew to a halt before the great oak doors of Ravenstone Hall, and the two men were met by a butler, a gaunt figure named Grayson, whose pallor suggested he had not seen sunlight in decades. "Monsieur Holmes, Captain Hastings," he intoned, bowing stiffly. "Sir Reginald awaits you in the drawing-room. Pray follow me." The interior of the hall was no less foreboding than its exterior. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, and the corridors were lined with portraits of Wycliffe's long dead, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors with silent judgment. The drawing-room, however, was a study in faded opulence, heavy velvet drapes, a roaring fire, and a collection of antique furniture that spoke of wealth and neglect in equal measure. Seated by the hearth was Sir Reginald Wycliffe, a man whose lined face and stooped shoulders belied his 60 years. Beside him stood a younger woman, her dark hair pinned severely, her expression one of guarded apprehension. This, Hastings learned, was Miss Eleanor Wycliffe, Sir Reginald's niece and ward. "Monsieur Holmes," Sir Reginald began, his voice a low rasp, "I cannot express my gratitude for your coming. We are in dire need of your clarity." He gestured to a chair, and Holmes, with his characteristic precision, settled into it, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Clarity, Sir Reginald," Holmes replied, "is my profession. Pray, Tell me of this shadow you spoke of in your letter. Sir Reginald exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who nodded almost imperceptibly. It began 3 weeks ago, he said, when my son Charles returned from London. He had been troubled, you see, restless, secretive. He spoke of debts, of enemies, though he would not name them. Then, 10 days ago, he vanished. Vanished? Holmes's eyebrows lifted slightly, a sign of interest that Hastings knew well. You mean he left the house? No, Monsieur Holmes, Eleanor interjected, her voice steady but tinged with strain. He was here, in this very house, and then he was gone. His bed was empty, his belongings untouched. We searched the grounds, the moor, even the village, but there was no trace of him. Hastings, ever the empathetic soul, leaned forward. Good heavens, Miss Wycliffe, that must have been dreadful. Have the police been informed? Sir Reginald's face darkened. The police, he said bitterly, are fools. They poked about for a day, muttered something about Charles running off to escape his debts, and left us to our fears. But I know my son. He would not abandon his family, not without a word. Holmes's eyes narrowed and he leaned back, his fingers steepled before him. Tell me, Sir Reginald, who else resides in this house? I must
have a complete picture of the household. The old man nodded.
There is myself, of course, and Eleanor. My younger daughter, Clara, who is but 16 and delicate of health. Then there is Dr. Mortimer Langston, our family physician, who has been staying with us to tend to Clara. Mr. Victor Harrow, a friend of Charles's from London, arrived shortly before his disappearance and has remained, claiming concern for us. And Mrs. Abigail Thorne, our housekeeper, who has been with the family for 30 years. The servants, Grayson, the butler, Mary, the maid, and Thomas, the groundskeeper, complete the household. Holmes absorbed this information with a slight nod. And the relationships among them? Any tensions, rivalries, or secrets? Eleanor hesitated, her lips tightening. Charles and Victor had quarreled recently, she admitted. I overheard them in the library one night, speaking in raised voices about money and some indiscretion. I could not catch the details. And Clara? Holmes pressed. What is the nature of her illness? Dr. Langston calls it a nervous condition, Sir Reginald said. She is frail, easily overwhelmed. She keeps to her room most days. Holmes's gaze drifted to the fire, his mind clearly turning over the facts. I will need to see Charles's room, he said at length, and I must speak with each member of the household. Every detail, however trivial, may be of consequence. As Grayson led them to Charles's quarters, Hastings could not suppress a shiver. The room was as Eleanor had described, untouched, as though its occupant had simply stepped out for a moment. The bed was neatly made, the wardrobe full, a half-read novel lying open on the nightstand. Holmes moved with the precision of a surgeon, examining every surface, every object. He paused at the window, which overlooked the bleak expanse of the moor, and ran his fingers along the sill. Curious, he murmured, almost to himself. The latch is scratched, as though forced, yet the window is locked from within. Hastings frowned. Forced? But how could that be, if the window is locked? Holmes did not answer immediately, his attention now on a small silver cigarette case on the dresser. He opened it, revealing a single cigarette, its paper faintly stained with a reddish-brown mark. Blood, he said softly, or something meant to resemble it. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and observations. Holmes, with his usual blend of charm and insistence, interviewed each member of the household. Dr. Langston, a wiry man. As they retired to their guest rooms, Hastings turned to Holmes. "What do you make of it, old chap? This business with the window and the cigarette case, it's all rather eerie, isn't it?" Holmes's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Eerie, perhaps, but not inexplicable. The human mind, Hastings, is a labyrinth, and within its twists lie the answers. Tomorrow we shall begin to unravel them." And so, as the wind howled across the moor and the great house creaked under its own weight, Hastings lay awake, haunted by the thought that the shadow over Ravenston Hall was only beginning to take shape. Chapter 2. The Stain of Death. The morning following their arrival at Ravenston Hall broke with a feeble sun struggling through the Dartmoor mist, casting a pallid glow over the ancient manor. Captain Hastings, roused from a fitful sleep by the distant clang of a breakfast gong, found Sherlock Holmes already dressed and pacing their shared sitting room, his eyes alight with that restless energy that signaled his mind was fully engaged. The Belgian detective's neat appearance, his suit immaculate, his mustache perfectly trimmed, stood in stark contrast to the disheveled gloom of the house. "Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, barely glancing up from a small notebook in which he was jotting observations. "I trust you slept well despite the ambience of our surroundings." Hastings, rubbing his eyes, managed a wry smile. "Slept well? Hardly, Holmes. This place has a way of creeping into one's dreams. I kept imagining footsteps in the corridor, though I dare say it was just the wind." Holmes's lips twitched. "The wind, my friend, is a convenient scapegoat for the imagination. But come, we have work to do. The shadow over this house grows darker, and I suspect it has taken a more sinister form than a mere disappearance." Before Hastings could press for details, a sharp cry echoed through the hall, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. The two men exchanged a glance and hastened toward the source, which proved to be the ground staircase leading to the servants' quarters. There, at the foot of the stairs, lay the crumpled form of Mary, the young maid, her face ashen and her hands clutching at her apron. A small crowd had gathered, Sir Reginald, his face drawn, Eleanor, her eyes wide with alarm, and Grayson, the butler, who knelt beside the girl, attempting to revive her. "What has happened?" Holmes demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "It's Mary, sir," Grayson said, his voice trembling. "She was found just now, collapsed here. I fear she is dead." Holmes knelt beside the girl, his fingers deftly checking for a pulse. His expression remained impassive, but Hastings, who knew his friend's subtleties, noted the slight tightening of his jaw. "She is indeed dead."
Bluish tint about her lips, and the rigidity of her limbs. Poison, most likely, though we shall need a proper examination to confirm it. A gasp rippled through the group. Eleanor clutched her uncle's arm, while Sir Reginald's face grew even paler. "Poison," he whispered. "But who would do such a thing? Mary was a harmless girl, devoted to her duties." Holmes's grey eyes swept the assembled faces, lingering on each, as though reading their thoughts. "That, Sir Reginald, is precisely what I intend to discover. Hastings, assist me in moving the body to a more private location. We must preserve the scene for inspection." With Grayson's help, they carried Mary's body to a small parlor off the main hall, laying her gently on a chaise longue. Holmes dismissed the others, save for Hastings, and began a meticulous examination of the corpse. He noted the girl's dilated pupils, the faint scent of almonds on her breath, and a small, half-empty vial clutched in her hand, its label smudged but legible. "Laudanum." "Laudanum?" Hastings said, frowning. "Could she have taken it herself, Holmes? An accident, perhaps, or worse?" Holmes shook his head, his fingers tracing the vial's rim. "An accident is possible, but unlikely. The quantity here suggests a deliberate overdose, And the placement of the vial in her hand is too convenient. No, Hastings, this was no suicide. Someone wished it to appear so, but the little gray cells protest. Observe the faint bruising on her wrist. Someone held her tightly, perhaps to force the poison down. Hastings shuddered. Good Lord, Holmes. First Charles vanishes, and now this poor girl is murdered. What kind of fiend are we dealing with? A clever one, Holmes replied, his voice low. One who seeks to obscure their tracks with theatricality. But they have made a mistake, Hastings. The bruise, the vial, the timing, all are clues. And clues are the breadcrumbs that lead to truth. Leaving the parlor under Grayson's watch, Holmes requested a meeting with the household in the drawing room. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the residents gathered. Sir Reginald leaning heavily on his cane, Eleanor, her composure strained, Clara, pale and trembling, accompanied by Dr. Langston, Victor Harrow, his eyes darting nervously, and Mrs. Thorne, her face a mask of stoic grief. The servants, Thomas and Grayson, stood at the back, their expressions unreadable. Holmes stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his demeanor calm yet commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "a tragedy has struck Ravenstone Hall. Mary, a loyal servant, has been found dead, the victim of poison. This is no accident, nor, I believe, a suicide. It is murder."
Simple girl. Why would anyone wish her harm? Holmes's gaze fixed on Harrow, unblinking. A simple girl, perhaps, but one who saw or heard something she should not have. "Tell me, Mr. Harrow, where were you between midnight and 6 this morning?" Harrow bristled. "In my room, asleep, like any sensible person. I heard nothing until the commotion this morning." "And you, Miss Wycliffe?" Holmes turned to Eleanor, who flinched slightly under his scrutiny. "I was in my room as well," she said. "I retired early as Clara was unwell, and I wished to check on her." Holmes nodded, his expression giving nothing away. He proceeded to question each member of the household, noting their alibis with meticulous care. Dr. Langston claimed to have been tending to Clara until late, then retired to his own room. Mrs. Thorne had been in the kitchen, preparing the morning's bread. Thomas, the groundskeeper, had been in his cottage on the edge of the estate. Clara, barely able to speak, whispered that she had slept fitfully, disturbed by nightmares. As the interview concluded, Holmes drew Hastings aside. "What do you make of their stories, my friend?" he asked, his tone deceptively light. Hastings frowned. "They all seem plausible, Holmes, but there's something off. Harrow's too defensive, and Eleanor seemed nervous when you asked about her movements. And poor Clara, she's terrified, isn't she?" "Indeed," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "Fear, Hastings, is a powerful motivator. It can drive one to silence or to murder. I must examine the scene of the crime more closely. Come." They returned to the staircase where Mary had been found. Holmes crawled along the steps, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting every inch of the worn carpet and stone. At the third step from the bottom, he paused, plucking a small, glistening object from the fibers. It was a pearl earring, delicate and out of place. "Curious," Holmes murmured. "This does not belong to a maid, I think. The craftsmanship is too fine, the pearl too costly." "Could it be Eleanor's?" Hastings suggested. "Or Clara's?" "Perhaps," Holmes said, slipping the earring into his pocket. "But we must not leap to conclusions. The mind must remain orderly, Hastings, like a well-kept garden. We shall cultivate these clues and see what blooms." The rest of the day was spent in further exploration. Holmes examined the servants' quarters, the kitchen, and the grounds, noting the layout of the house with a small sketch in his notebook. He paid particular attention to a narrow passageway leading from the main hall to the servants' stairs, its walls scuffed and its floor bearing faint traces of mud. As evening fell, The household gathered for a somber dinner, the absence of Mary and Charles casting a pall over the meal. Holmes, ever observant, watched the interactions with keen interest, noting the way Eleanor avoided Harrow's gaze.
Dr. Langston's hand trembled as he poured wine, and the way Mrs. Thorne's eyes lingered on Sir Reginald with a mixture of loyalty and something deeper, perhaps resentment. Retiring to their rooms, Hastings could not shake the growing dread that clung to Ravenstone Hall. "Holmes," he said, as they sat by the fire. "This place feels like a trap. 2 crimes now, and no clear answers. Are we any closer to the truth?" Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Closer, Hastings, than our Corrie suspects. The earring, the bruise, the vial, these are the threads of a tapestry, and I begin to see its pattern. Tomorrow we shall tug at these threads and watch what unravels." As the fire crackled and the moor's wind howled, Hastings felt a chill that had little to do with the cold. The shadow over Ravenstone Hall had grown darker, and he feared what horrors it might yet conceal. Chapter 3. The Arrival of the Master. The third day at Ravenstone Hall dawned with a heaviness that seemed to seep from the very stones of the ancient manor. The mist, which had clung to the Dartmoor landscape like a shroud, showed no signs of lifting, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Captain Hastings, who had spent another restless night haunted by the image of poor Mary's lifeless form, found himself at the breakfast table, stirring his tea absently as he watched the somber faces of the household. The events of the previous day, the discovery of the maid's murder, and the unsettling interviews had cast a pall over Ravenstone, and even the clink of silverware seemed muted, as though the house itself mourned. Sherlock Holmes, however, was a study in calm precision. He entered the dining room with his usual air of fastidious elegance, his suit pressed, his moustache immaculate, and his grey eyes alight with a quiet intensity. Hastings had long since learned that this serene demeanour often masked a mind racing at full tilt, piecing together fragments of evidence with the precision of a watchmaker. Holmes took his seat, declining the offer of food with a polite wave, and instead produced his small notebook, flipping through its pages as though consulting an oracle. "Good morning, Hastings," he said, his voice low but clear. "I trust you are ready for a day of observation and deduction. The threads of this mystery are beginning to weave themselves into a pattern, but we must be vigilant. The smallest detail may prove the key." Before Hastings could respond, the door to the dining room opened, and Grayson, the butler, entered, his gaunt face even paler than usual. "Monsieur Holmes, Captain Hastings," he said, bowing slightly. "A telegram has arrived for you, sir. It was delivered just now from the village." Holmes took the telegram with a nod, his fingers deftly unfolding the paper. His eyes scanned the brief message, and a faint smile curved his lips.
"This is from Inspector Japp, Hastings. He's been informed of Mary's death and will arrive this afternoon to take charge of the investigation. His methods, while crude, may yet prove useful."
"Japp," Hastings said, brightening at the mention of their old acquaintance. "Well, that's a bit of good news, isn't it? He's a solid fellow, even if he's no match for you, Holmes." Holmes's smile widened, though there was a hint of mischief in it. "Solid, yes, but prone to seeing only what is placed before him. Still, his arrival will stir the waters, and in the ripples we may find what we seek. For now, let us continue our work." The morning was spent in further exploration of Ravenstone Hall. Holmes, with Hastings trailing behind, insisted on examining the servants' quarters more closely, particularly the small room where Mary had slept. The space was Spartan, with a narrow bed, a single chair, and a worn dresser. Holmes moved with methodical care, his magnifying glass glinting as he inspected the floorboards, the walls, and the meagre belongings. At the foot of the bed he paused, crouching to examine a faint stain on the rug, a dark, irregular patch no larger than a shilling. "Blood?" Hastings asked, his stomach turning at the thought. "Not blood.
Holmes said, sniffing the stain delicately. Ink, I believe. Black ink, recently spilled. Curious that a maid should have such a substance in her room, don't you think? And yet, there is no pen or paper to be found. He rose, his gaze sweeping the room once more before settling on a small wooden box tucked beneath the bed. Inside, they found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Holmes untied the knot with care, his fingers nimble, and scanned the contents. The letters were brief, written in a hurried hand, and addressed to Mary from someone signing only as C. The tone was urgent, almost desperate, speaking of promises made and dangers looming. C. Holmes mused, slipping the letters into his pocket. Charles Wycliffe, perhaps, or another C within this house. We must tread carefully, Hastings. These letters suggest Mary was more than a bystander in the events that have unfolded. Their investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Japp, whose hearty voice echoed through the hall as he was shown into the drawing room. Japp, a stocky man with a walrus moustache and a penchant for straightforward solutions, greeted Holmes and Hastings with a mix of warmth and exasperation. "Well, well, Monsieur Holmes," he said, shaking hands vigorously. "Up to your old tricks, eh? I hear you've been poking about before the proper authorities could get here. What's this about a murdered maid and a missing heir?" Holmes, unruffled, gestured for Japp to sit. "The situation, Inspector, is one of considerable complexity. Charles Wycliffe, the son of Sir Reginald, vanished 10 days ago under mysterious circumstances. Yesterday,
Mary, a maid, was found dead, poisoned, I am certain, with laudanum administered by force. The two events are connected, though the precise nature of that connection remains to be uncovered." Japp's eyebrows rose. "Poison, you say? That's a nasty business. And you're sure it's murder, not suicide?" Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Quite sure, Inspector. The bruising on her wrist, the staged placement of the vial, these are the marks of a deliberate act. But come, let us show you the scene." They led Japp to the parlour where Mary's body had been placed, now covered with a sheet pending the coroner's arrival. Holmes pointed out the key details: the bluish tint of the lips, the vial, the bruise. Japp, though sceptical, took careful notes, his pencil scratching loudly in the quiet room. "Right," he said at length. "I'll have my men search the house and grounds. If there's a killer here, we'll flush them out." Holmes inclined his head. "A thorough search is wise, Inspector, but I suggest you pay particular attention to the alibis of the household. Each has a story, but not all stories hold water." The rest of the afternoon was a flurry of activity as Japp's constables arrived, their heavy boots echoing through the halls. Holmes, however, preferred to work in his own way, retreating to the library to question the household once more. This time, he focused on their movements during the critical hours of Mary's death. Victor Harrow, still defensive, insisted he had heard nothing unusual. Eleanor admitted to hearing a faint cry around midnight, but dismissed it as Clara's nightmares. Dr. Langston, flustered, claimed to have been in his room writing letters. Mrs. Thorne, tight-lipped as ever, said she had been asleep in her quarters. Clara, when pressed, could only whisper that she had seen a shadow moving in the corridor, a claim that sent a chill through Hastings. Holmes, undeterred by the vague answers, turned his attention to the pearl earring found on the staircase. He presented it to the household, watching their reactions closely. Eleanor's hand flew to her ear, her face paling as she realized one of her own earrings was missing. It must have fallen," she stammered. "I often walk the halls at night when I cannot sleep." "Indeed," Holmes said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "And yet it was found on the servants' stairs, a place you claim not to frequent. Curious, is it not?" Eleanor had no answer, and the room fell silent. Holmes excused himself, beckoning Hastings to follow. Outside, in the shadow of the hall's great oak doors, he spoke softly. "The earring is a significant clue, Hastings, but it is not yet the key. It points to Eleanor, yes, but points are not proof. We must dig deeper, into motives, into secrets." As evening approached,
Holmes requested a map of the house from Grayson, which he studied with intense concentration. He traced the narrow passageway from
The main hall to the servants' stairs, noting its proximity to Charles's room and the kitchen. "This passage," he said, tapping the map, "is a vein through which the lifeblood of this mystery flows. Someone used it, Hastings, and not for innocent purposes." Dinner that night was a tense affair, the household subdued under Japp's watchful eye. Holmes, as was his habit, ate sparingly, his attention fixed on the interplay of glances and silences. Hastings, seated beside him, could not shake the feeling that they were dining in the presence of a killer, one who watched, waited, and planned their next move. As they retired to their rooms, Holmes paused at the window, gazing out at the moonlit moor. "The game is afoot, Hastings," he said softly. "Mary's death is no isolated act. It is a piece of a larger puzzle, one that began with Charles Wycliffe's disappearance. Tomorrow, we shall tighten the net." Hastings, lying awake in the darkness, felt the weight of those words. Ravenstone Hall, with its secrets and shadows, seemed to close in around them, and he wondered what horrors the coming days would reveal. Chapter 4. The Interrogations Deepen. The fourth morning at Ravenstone Hall broke with a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the ancient manor. The mist outside clung stubbornly to the Dartmoor landscape, shrouding the grounds in a veil of grey that mirrored the unease within. Captain Hastings, whose nerves were fraying under the weight of 2 crimes and no clear answers, found himself at the breakfast table, his appetite diminished by the oppressive atmosphere. The household, too, was subdued, their faces drawn as they picked at their food under the watchful eyes of Inspector Japp's constables, who had taken up posts at the hall's entrances. Sherlock Holmes, however, remained a beacon of calm amid the storm. He entered the dining room with his customary precision, his suit as impeccable as ever, his grey eyes sharp with purpose. Hastings noted the small leather notebook in his hand, its pages now filled with cryptic notes and sketches. "Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, taking his seat. "I trust you are prepared for a day of illumination. The threads of this mystery are beginning to converge, and we must follow them with care." Before Hastings could reply, Inspector Japp joined them, his moustache bristling with determination. "Morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice gruff. "My men have searched the grounds and found nothing, no sign of young Wycliffe, no murder weapon, no footprints in this blasted mud. I'm beginning to think your poisoner's a ghost, Holmes." Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. "A ghost, Inspector? No, our culprit is flesh and blood, and their mistakes are mounting. Today I shall speak with each member of the household alone."
Defer to Holmes's methods. "Right then, I'll keep my men on patrol and see if we can't shake something loose. But mark my words, Holmes, this case is a devilish one." Holmes inclined his head. "Devilish, perhaps, but not insoluble. Come, Hastings, let us begin." The morning was devoted to a series of private interviews conducted in the library, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and heavy oak furniture. Holmes sat behind a large desk, his posture erect, his hands folded neatly before him, while Hastings stood by the window, taking notes and observing the proceedings. The first to be summoned was Eleanor Wycliffe, whose composure seemed to fray further with each passing day. "Mademoiselle Wycliffe," Holmes began, his voice smooth but probing, "let us speak of the pearl earring found on the servants' stairs. You claim it fell during one of your nocturnal walks, yet you do not frequent that part of the house. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap, her eyes avoiding Holmes's gaze. I must have dropped it earlier," she said, her voice faltering.
I sometimes walk the halls when I cannot sleep. The earring could have fallen anywhere. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. And the cry you heard at midnight, the night Mary died. You dismissed it as Clara's nightmares, yet Clara claims she slept poorly but made no sound. Who then cried out? Eleanor's face paled. I may have been mistaken, she said quickly. The house is old, full of strange noises. It could have been the wind. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. The wind, mademoiselle, does not cry out in human tones, nor does it leave ink stains in a maid's room or bruises on her wrist. Tell me, did you know Mary well? Did she confide in you about any concerns? Eleanor hesitated, her lips parting as though to speak, then closing again. Mary was a servant, she said at last. We spoke little. She was diligent, quiet. I knew nothing of her personal affairs. Holmes nodded, dismissing her with a wave. As she left, he turned to Hastings. She knows more than she admits, Hastings. Her hesitation, her avoidance, these are signs of a burdened conscience. But is it guilt or fear? Next came Victor Harrow, whose swaggering confidence seemed diminished in the face of Holmes's scrutiny. Mr. Harrow, Holmes said, you and Charles Wycliffe quarrelled before his disappearance. The subject was money and an indiscretion. What was the nature of this indiscretion? Harrow shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It was nothing serious, Monsieur Holmes. Charles had a habit of gambling, you see. He owed me a sum, nothing ruinous, but enough to cause a row. As for indiscretions, well, Charles was a man about town. He had
Your claim of sleeping soundly. I have observed the mud on your boots, fresh from the moor. You were out in the night, were you not? Harrow's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. A walk, that's all. I couldn't sleep, so I took some air. The moor's a lonely place, but it clears the head. Indeed, Holmes said, his tone neutral. And did you see or hear anything unusual during this walk? Nothing, Harrow said too quickly. Just the wind and the dark. The interviews continued in this vein. Dr. Langston, nervous and fidgety, claimed to have been writing letters in his room, though he could produce no evidence of them. Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper, was stoic, insisting she had been asleep and knew nothing of Mary's death. Thomas, the groundskeeper, admitted to patrolling the estate at night, but saw no one near the servants' stairs. Clara, when brought in, was barely coherent, her frail form trembling as she whispered of shadows and whispers in the night. Holmes's final interview was with Sir Reginald himself, who entered the library leaning heavily on his cane. Monsieur Holmes, he said, his voice weary, this house is cursed. First my son, now Mary. I fear we are all doomed. Holmes regarded him with a steady gaze. A curse, Sir Reginald, is but a story men tell to explain what they do not understand. Tell me, what was Charles's state of mind before he vanished? You mentioned debts and enemies. Who were these enemies? Sir Reginald sighed, his shoulders slumping. Charles was reckless, Monsieur Holmes. He spoke of men in London, creditors perhaps, or worse. He would not confide in me fully. I begged him to stay, to face his troubles, but he was stubborn. And Mary? Holmes pressed. Did she ever speak of Charles, or of anything unusual? She was a good girl, Sir Reginald said, his voice breaking. Loyal, discreet. If she knew something, she kept it to herself. As Sir Reginald left, Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Each of them, Hastings, has a piece of the puzzle, but none will give it freely. The letters signed C, the earring, the ink stain, these are the threads we must follow. And there is another matter, the passageway to the servants' stairs. I suspect it has seen more traffic than we have been told. Holmes led Hastings to the narrow passageway he had noted the previous day, its walls scuffed and its floor bearing faint traces of mud. Using his magnifying glass, he examined the marks closely, noting their direction and depth. "These tracks," he said, "suggest someone moved quickly, perhaps in haste. And here," he pointed to a small, crumpled piece of paper wedged in a crack in the wall. Unfolding it, he revealed a torn fragment of a letter, written in the same hurried hand as those found in Mary's room.
Holmes' eyes gleamed. "The demon of the ruins," he repeated softly. "A poetic phrase, Hastings, but one that points to something tangible. The ruins, I believe, refer to the old chapel on the estate, half a mile from the hall. We shall visit it this afternoon." As they prepared to leave, Japp approached, his face grim. "Holmes, we found something in the kitchen, a bottle of laudanum, hidden in a flour sack. It's half empty, and the label matches the vial found with Mary." Holmes nodded, unsurprised. "A clumsy attempt to conceal the source of the poison. The killer grows careless, Inspector. Keep that bottle safe. It is evidence." The afternoon saw Holmes and Hastings trudging across the moor to the ruins of the old chapel, a crumbling stone structure overgrown with ivy. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the wind carried a low, mournful hum. Holmes moved with purpose, examining the ground for signs of disturbance. Near the altar, he found a patch of earth recently turned, as though something had been buried or unearthed. "Mark this, Hastings," he said, kneeling to inspect the soil. "Someone has been here, and recently. The earth is loose, the grass trampled. We must return with tools to dig properly." As they made their way back to the hall, the weight of the mystery pressed heavily on Hastings. "Holmes," he said, "this talk of demons and ruins, it's all so fantastical. Do you truly believe we're close to the truth?" Holmes' smile was enigmatic. "The truth, Hastings, is never fantastical, only logical. The demon of the ruins is no supernatural force, but a human one, driven by motive and opportunity. Tonight, we shall watch and listen, for the killer is among us, and they will not remain silent for long." As darkness fell over Ravenstone Hall, Hastings felt the noose of suspicion tightening, and he wondered who among the household would be the next to fall. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The fifth day at Ravenstone Hall dawned with a grim determination, as though the very stones of the manor were bracing for the revelations to come. The mist over Dartmoor had thickened, cloaking the landscape in an impenetrable grey that seemed to mirror the tangled web of deceit within the house. Captain Hastings, whose nerves were stretched taut by the mounting mysteries, found himself at the breakfast table, his coffee untouched, as he watched the household navigate their meal with strained civility. The murder of Mary, coupled with Charles Wycliffe's disappearance, had cast a shadow so dark that even the clatter of cutlery felt like an intrusion. Sherlock Holmes, however, was as composed as ever, his grey eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. He had spent the early hours reviewing his notebook, cross-referencing the ruins. To Hastings, the case seemed a labyrinth of contradictions, but Holmes's serene demeanor suggested he was beginning to see the path through. "Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, taking a seat with a small nod. "Today we shall encounter the red herrings, the distractions that our quarry hopes will lead us astray. But the little grey cells, they are not so easily fooled." Before Hastings could ask what he meant, Inspector Japp burst into the dining room, his face flushed with excitement. "Holmes," he exclaimed, brandishing a small leather pouch. "One of my men found this hidden in the stables, tucked behind a bale of hay. It's Charles Wycliffe's, no doubt. His initials are monogrammed on it. And inside, look." Japp opened the pouch to reveal a bundle of pound notes, a gold pocket watch, and a crumpled photograph of a young woman with a coy smile. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Good heavens, Japp! This could mean Charles planned to flee. Perhaps he's not missing at all, but ran off with this woman. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he examined the contents. A tempting conclusion, Hastings, and one our killer no doubt wishes us to draw. But observe, the photograph is old, its edges worn, suggesting it was kept for sentiment, not recent intent. And the money, it is pristine, as though never circulated. This pouch was placed to be found, to suggest Charles's flight. A red herring, Inspector, designed to divert us from the truth. Japp frowned, his enthusiasm dimming. You're saying someone planted this, but why go to such trouble? Because, Holmes said, his voice low, the true crime is far graver than a disappearance, and our culprit seeks to muddy the waters. We must return to the chapel ruins, Hastings. The disturbed earth there holds secrets that will not be so easily dismissed. The morning was spent preparing for the excursion to the ruins. Holmes, armed with a small shovel borrowed from Thomas, the groundskeeper, led Hastings and Japp across the moor. The chapel, a crumbling relic of stone and ivy, looms like a spectre in the mist. Holmes knelt at the patch of earth he had noted the previous day, his movements precise as he began to dig. The soil was loose, and within minutes he uncovered a small, rusted tin box, its lid sealed with wax. Careful, Holmes, Japp warned, his hand on his revolver. Could be dangerous. Holmes ignored the caution, prying open the box to reveal a collection of papers, letters, receipts, and a small leather-bound journal. The letters were in Charles Wycliffe's hand, addressed to an unnamed recipient, and spoke of debts, threats, and a plan to end it all at the ruins. The journal, however, was more revealing, its pages filled with cryptic entries about a demon that haunted the family, a secret tied to the Wycliffe lineage. This, Holmes said, holding up
Charles's mind, and perhaps into the motive for his disappearance and Mary's murder. Back at the hall, Holmes retreated to the library to study the documents, while Japp sent his men to comb the stables for further evidence. Hastings, ever loyal, remained at Holmes's side, watching as the detective's fingers traced the journal's entries. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" he asked. "This talk of a demon, it's unsettling, to say the least." Holmes's smile was faint but knowing. "The demon, Hastings, is a metaphor, a creation of fear or guilt. Charles was troubled, yes, but not by the supernatural. These entries suggest he uncovered something, a secret about his family, perhaps, or a betrayal. And Mary, poor girl, may have stumbled upon it as well." Holmes' reading was interrupted by a commotion in the hall. Eleanor Wycliffe, her face pale and her hands trembling, burst into the library. "Monsieur Holmes," she cried. "It's Clara. She's collapsed. Dr. Langston is with her, but she's in a terrible state." Holmes and Hastings hurried to Clara's room, where they found the young girl lying on her bed, her face deathly white, her breathing shallow. Dr. Langston was administering a sedative, his hands shaking as he worked. "It's her nerves," he said, his voice strained. "She's been overwrought since Mary's death. I fear the strain is too much for her." Holmes's gaze was sharp as he observed the scene. "And what caused this collapse, Doctor? Did she speak of anything specific?" Langston hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. She mentioned seeing a figure in the garden last night, near the chapel path. She thought it was Charles, but it vanished into the mist." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A figure, you say? Most interesting. And you, Miss Wycliffe, were you with her when she saw this?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, I was in my room. Clara told me this morning, but I thought it was another of her fancies. She's been so fragile." Holmes dismissed them with a nod, but as they left, he turned to Hastings. "Another red herring, perhaps, or a genuine clue. Clara's vision may be the product of fear, but it aligns with our findings at the ruins. Someone has been moving about this estate at night, and they are not as careful as they believe."
The afternoon saw Holmes and Japp conducting a second round of interviews, this time focusing on the household's movements the previous night. Victor Harrow, when pressed, admitted to another late-night walk, claiming he was searching for Charles. Mrs. Thorne, tight-lipped, said she had seen a light in the garden, but assumed it was Thomas on his rounds. Thomas, however, denied being near the chapel path. Dr. Langston, increasingly nervous, claimed to have been in his room, though his dishevelled appearance suggested otherwise. As evening approached, Holmes gathered the household in the drawing room, his demeanour calm but commanding.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the events at Ravenstone Hall are no random acts of fate. Charles Wycliffe's disappearance and Mary's murder are linked by a single thread, a secret that someone in this house is desperate to conceal. I urge you to speak now, before another tragedy strikes." The room was silent, but the tension was palpable. Harrow's jaw tightened, Eleanor's hands clenched, and Dr. Langston's tic grew more pronounced. Clara, supported by Eleanor, stared at the floor, her eyes wide with fear. Sir Reginald, his face etched with grief, shook his head. "If there is a secret," he said, "I know it not. But I beg you, Monsieur Holmes, find my son." Holmes's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "I shall, Sir Reginald, and I shall find the killer. The truth is near, and it will not be hidden much longer." As the household dispersed, Holmes drew Hastings aside. "The red herrings multiply, Hastings," he said softly. "The pouch in the stables, Clara's vision, the journal, they are meant to distract us, but the ink stain, the earring, the letters signed C, these are the true clues. Tonight, we shall watch the passageway to the servants' stairs. I suspect our killer will move again." Dinner was a sombre affair, the household barely speaking as Japp's constable stood guard. Holmes, as was his habit, ate sparingly, his attention fixed on the subtle glances and silences. Hastings, seated beside him, felt the weight of the mystery pressing down, the sense that they were circling ever closer to a truth too terrible to face. As they retired to their rooms, Holmes paused at the window, gazing out at the moonlit moor. "The net tightens, Hastings," he said. "The demon of the ruins is no phantom, but a human heart twisted by greed or fear. Tomorrow we shall lay a trap." Hastings, lying awake in the darkness, felt the chill of those words. Ravenstone Hall was a house of secrets, and he feared what price they would pay to uncover them. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The sixth day at Ravenstone Hall brought with it a subtle shift in the air, as though the manor itself sensed the tightening grip of Sherlock Holmes's investigation. The Dartmoor mist, ever present, seemed to press closer, muffling sound and blurring the edges of the world beyond the windows. Captain Hastings, whose sleep had been plagued by uneasy dreams of shadows and cries, rose with a sense of foreboding. The discovery of the tin box at the chapel ruins, the cryptic journal entries, and the mounting red herrings had only deepened the mystery, and he felt as though they were teetering on the edge of a revelation or a catastrophe. Sherlock Holmes, however, was as composed as ever, his movements precise as he adjusted his cuffs and reviewed his notebook over a sparse breakfast of tea, sifting through the web of clues with relentless precision.
"Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, his voice calm but laced with purpose. "Today we shall focus on the details, the small, overlooked threads that weave the truth. The killer has been careless, and we shall exploit that carelessness." Before Hastings could respond, Inspector Japp entered the dining room, his face grim. "Holmes, we've had another find," he said, holding up a small cloth bag. "One of my men found this in the kitchen garden, near the herb patch. It's a syringe, and it smells faintly of laudanum. Could be what was used to poison the maid." Holmes took the bag, examining the syringe with his magnifying glass. "Most interesting, Inspector," he said, his tone measured. "The syringe is clean, save for the faint residue of laudanum. No fingerprints, no scratches, a pristine tool for a deadly act. Yet its placement in the garden is curious. Why not dispose of it in the moor, where it would never be found?" Japp scratched his moustache. "You think it's another plant, like that pouch in the stables?" "Precisely," Holmes replied. "Our killer is fond of misdirection, but they underestimate the power of observation. This syringe, like the pouch, is a distraction. The true clue lies elsewhere, in a detail we have yet to fully unravel." Holmes's attention turned to the journal from the chapel ruins, which he had spent the previous evening studying. The entries, written in Charles Wycliffe's hurried hand, spoke of a demon tied to the family's past, a secret buried in the ruins. One passage in particular caught Holmes's eye. "The truth lies in the third stone, where the shadow falls at dusk." The words were cryptic, but Holmes's mind seized upon them with the tenacity of a bloodhound. "Hastings," he said, rising from the table, "we must return to the chapel ruins. The journal points to a specific location, the third stone. I suspect it holds a clue that will illuminate both Charles's fate and Mary's murder." Leaving Japp to organize his constables, Holmes and Hastings set out across the moor, the damp air clinging to their coats as they approached the crumbling chapel. The ruins, stark against the grey sky, seemed to pulse with an eerie stillness. Holmes moved directly to the altar, where a row of weathered stones formed a rough semicircle. Counting carefully, he identified the third stone.
Journal was precise, Holmes said, opening the envelope with care. Charles was no fool. He hid this where only the astute would look. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in the same hand as the journal. It read, "The demon is not one, but two. They know what I found, and they will kill to keep it buried. If I am gone, look to the ledger." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The ledger," he murmured. "Charles discovered something. A financial irregularity, perhaps, or a betrayal. And he was not alone in his knowledge. Mary, I suspect, was privy to it, which is why she was silenced." Returning to the hall, Holmes requested access to the family's financial records, a task that sent Sir Reginald into a state of agitation. "Monsieur Holmes," he protested, "our accounts are private. Charles had no business meddling in them, and neither do you." Holmes's gaze was unyielding. "Sir Reginald, your son's disappearance and the murder of a servant suggest otherwise. The ledger may hold the key to both crimes. I insist on seeing it." Reluctantly, Sir Reginald led them to his study, where a heavy, leather-bound ledger was produced from a locked drawer. Holmes pored over the pages, his fingers tracing columns of figures with meticulous care. After several minutes, he paused, his expression one of quiet triumph. "Here, Hastings," he said, pointing to a series of entries. "Payments to an unnamed recipient, marked only as C. The amounts are substantial, and they began 6 months ago, coinciding with Charles's return from London." Hastings frowned. Payments to C. Could it be Charles himself? "Unlikely," Holmes said. "The entries are in Sir Reginald's hand,
and Charles had no access to these funds. No, this C is another. Someone within or close to the household. Someone Charles discovered and confronted. The discovery of the ledger prompted Holmes to request another round of interviews, this time focusing on financial matters. It began with Victor Harrow, whose unease was palpable. "Mr. Harrow," Holmes said, his voice deceptively mild, "you mentioned Charles's gambling debts. Were you aware of any payments made to a party identified only as C?" Harrow's eyes darted to the side. "No, I know nothing of that. Charles owed money to half of London, but he never mentioned any C." Holmes's smile was thin. "Yet you quarreled with him about money. And your boots, Mr. Harrow, bear traces of the same red clay found near the chapel ruins. Have you been visiting the third stone, perhaps?" Harrow's face reddened. "I told you, I walk the moor at night. The clay's everywhere out there." Next,
Mentioned debts, but nothing specific. He was worried, that's all. I thought it was just his reckless ways catching up with him.
Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing.
"And the letters signed C found in Mary's room. Do you know who wrote them?" Eleanor's breath caught, but she shook her head. "No, I don't. Mary never spoke of them." The interviews continued, each revealing little but adding to the mosaic of suspicion. Dr. Langston denied knowledge of the ledger, though his nervous tic betrayed his discomfort. Mrs. Thorne claimed ignorance of financial matters, her loyalty to Sir Reginald unwavering. Thomas, the groundskeeper, admitted to seeing Charles near the chapel weeks before his disappearance, but knew nothing of any payments. As evening fell, Holmes gathered Hastings and Japp in the library. "The ledger and the envelope are the clues we needed," he said. "Charles uncovered a scheme, extortion perhaps or embezzlement, linked to this C. Mary, I believe, overheard or saw something related to it, which cost her her life. The syringe in the garden, the pouch in the stables, these are attempts to divert us, but they only confirm the killer's desperation." Japp rubbed his chin. "So, you think this C is our killer?" "Not necessarily," Holmes said. "But they are central to the motive. We must find this ledger's counterpart, the records of the recipient. And we must watch the passageway tonight. The killer will move again, and we shall be ready." Dinner was a tense affair, the household barely speaking as the weight of suspicion hung heavy. Holmes, as always, observed every glance, every hesitation. Hastings, seated beside him, felt the air crackle with anticipation, as though the truth were a storm gathering on the horizon. As they retired to their rooms, Holmes paused at the door to the passageway, his expression resolute. "Tonight, Hastings," he said, "we shall be the hunters, not the hunted. The demon of the ruins is close, and we shall unmask them." Hastings, gripping his revolver, felt a chill that had little to do with the cold. The truth was near, but at what cost would it be revealed? Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The seventh day at Ravenstone Hall unfolded under a sky so heavy with mist that the moor seemed to vanish into a dreamlike haze, as though the world beyond the manor's walls had ceased to exist. Captain Hastings, whose nerves were worn thin by the relentless tension, found himself pacing the guest room, his thoughts a tangle of clues and suspicions. The discovery of the ledger, the cryptic envelope from the chapel ruins, and the syringe in the kitchen.
His notebook open, his grey eyes scanning the pages with unwavering focus. "Hastings," he said, his voice steady, Today we shall uncover the lies that bind this household. The killer believes they have outwitted us, but their deceptions are unraveling. The little grey cells, they do not rest. Before Hastings could respond, a sharp knock at the door announced the arrival of Inspector Japp, his face flushed with urgency. "Holmes, we've got something new," he said, holding up a folded piece of paper. "One of my men found this slipped under the door of the servants' quarters this morning. It's a note, unsigned, but it's... well, see for yourself." Holmes took the note, unfolding it with care. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged. "The truth is in the ledger. Beware the shadow that moves at midnight." His eyes gleamed with interest. "Most intriguing," he murmured. "This note is meant to guide us, or misguide us. The reference to the ledger confirms its importance, but the shadow at midnight suggests our killer is planning their next move." Hastings frowned. "But who would leave such a note, Holmes? And why?" "To provoke Hastings," Holmes replied, "all to deflect suspicion. The killer is growing bold, but boldness breeds mistakes. We must be vigilant tonight." The morning was spent in further investigation. Holmes insisted on re-examining the passageway to the servants' stairs, where the crumpled letter fragment mentioning the demon of the ruins had been found. Using his magnifying glass, he scrutinized the walls, noting a faint scratch mark at eye level, as though something had been pinned or taped there. "A message, perhaps," he said, removed in haste. "Someone used this passage to communicate secretly, and I suspect Mary was an unwitting witness." Their work was interrupted by a commotion from the drawing room. Eleanor Wycliffe, her face pale and her hands trembling, had confronted Victor Harrow in front of the household, her voice rising in accusation. Holmes and Hastings arrived just as she cried, "You knew about Charles's debts, Victor! You were with him in London, don't deny it! What did you do to him?" Harrow, his jaw tight, shot back, "I did nothing, Eleanor. Charles was in over his head and you know it. If anyone drove him away, it was this cursed family and its secrets." Sir Reginald, leaning heavily on his cane, stepped between them. "Enough!" he barked. "This bickering solves nothing. Monsieur Holmes, I beg you, put an end to this madness." Holmes, his expression unreadable, observed the scene with keen interest. "Madness, Sir Reginald, is often a mask for truth. Miss Wycliffe, Mr. Harrow, you both speak of Charles's troubles in London. I would know more. What secrets did he bring back to Ravenstone?" Eleanor hesitated. Her eyes
Someone dangerous. He wouldn't say more, only that she had a hold over him. Harrow snorted. "A woman? That's rich. Charles was drowning in debt, not love. He owed money to men who don't forgive easily. I tried to help him, but he wouldn't listen." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And these men, Mr. Harrow, did they follow him here? Or did you, perhaps, act as their intermediary?" Harrow's face reddened. "I'm no lackey, Holmes. I came here to help Charles, not to harm him." Holmes dismissed them with a nod. But his mind was clearly at work. To Hastings, he said, "The lies multiply, my friend. Eleanor speaks of a woman, Harrow of creditors, yet neither mentions the ledger or the C who received payments. Someone is protecting a secret, and it is tied to the ruins." The afternoon saw Holmes and Japp combing through the ledger once more, cross-referencing its entries with the household's alibis. A pattern emerged. The payments to C coincided with Charles's visits to London, suggesting a connection to his activities there. Holmes also noted a discrepancy, a sum of money recorded as paid to a local merchant for estate repairs, yet Thomas, the groundskeeper, claimed no such repairs had been made. "This," Holmes said, tapping the ledger, "is no mere error. The money was diverted, likely to C. Charles discovered it, and it cost him dearly." Their investigation was interrupted by a cry from Clara's room. Rushing upstairs, they found the young girl in a state of hysterics, clutching a small, crumpled letter.
Dr. Langston was attempting to calm her, but her eyes were wild with fear. "It was under my pillow," she sobbed. "Someone put it there, I know it." Holmes took the letter, his expression grave. It was in the same hurried hand as the note found that morning. "Keep silent or you'll join Mary in the shadows." The threat was clear, and Clara's terror was palpable. "Someone in this house seeks to silence her," Holmes said softly, his eyes scanning the room. "But why Clara? What does she know?" Dr. Langston, his hands trembling, admitted to prescribing sedatives for Clara's nerves, but denied knowledge of the letter. "She's been fragile since Charles vanished," he said. "This house is too much for her." Holmes's gaze lingered on the doctor. "And you, doctor, your tic grows worse with each question. What do you fear?" Langston flushed but said nothing, retreating to his medical bag. Holmes turned to Hastings. "The lies are surfacing, Hastings. Clara's fear, Eleanor's accusations, Harrow's defensiveness, they are all pieces of the puzzle. Tonight we shall watch the passageway and the chapel path. The killer will not resist the bait of Clara's terror." As evening fell, Holmes devised a plan. He instructed Japp to station a constable near Clara's room, while he and Hastings took up positions in the passageway, hidden in the shadows of an alcove.
The hours crept by, the house creaking under the weight of its secrets.
At 11:30, a faint sound broke the silence. A soft tread on the servants' stairs. Holmes's hand gripped Hastings' arm, signaling silence. Through the dim light, they saw a figure move swiftly down the passage, cloaked in a dark shawl. The figure paused at the door to the main hall, glancing about, then slipped outside toward the garden. Holmes and Hastings followed at a distance, their steps muffled by the thick carpet of grass. The figure headed toward the chapel path, their movements furtive. As they neared the ruins, Holmes signaled for Hastings to circle around, cutting off any escape. The figure stopped at the third stone, kneeling as though to retrieve something. Holmes stepped forward, his voice sharp in the night air. "Enough, my friend. The game is over." The figure froze, then turned, revealing Eleanor Wycliffe's pale face, her eyes wide with panic. "Monsieur Holmes," she gasped. I was only—" "Only what, mademoiselle?" Holmes interrupted, his tone icy. "Retrieving another clue to mislead us, or silencing another witness?" Eleanor's hands trembled, but she shook her head. "No, I swear it. I came to find Charles's journal. I thought it might hold answers. I didn't kill Mary, and I didn't harm Charles." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "Then explain the earring, the cry at midnight, the note under Clara's pillow. You are entangled in this web, Miss Wycliffe, and you must speak the truth." Eleanor's resolve crumbled, tears streaming down her face. I knew about the ledger," she admitted. "Charles showed it to me. He said someone was blackmailing the family, threatening to expose a scandal. He wouldn't tell me who, only that it was tied to the ruins. I thought if I found his journal, I could protect him." Holmes nodded, his expression softening slightly. "You have taken a step toward the truth, mademoiselle. But there is more you are not saying. Return to the house. We shall speak again." As Eleanor stumbled back to the hall, escorted by Japp, Holmes turned to Hastings. "The lies are cracking, Hastings. Eleanor knows more than she admits. But she is not our killer. Not yet. The true culprit is watching, waiting for us to falter. Tomorrow, we shall tighten the noose." Hastings, his heart pounding, felt the weight of the night pressing down. Ravenstone Hall was a house of shadows, and the truth, though closer, remained just out of reach. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The 8th day at Ravenstone Hall dawned with a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as though the manor itself awaited the breaking of its secrets. The Dartmoor mist, ever present, clung to the windows like a veil, softening the harsh edges of the world outside. Captain Hastings, who
The chapel ruins and the mounting web of lies, felt a growing sense of urgency. The mystery of Charles Wycliffe's disappearance and Mary's murder was drawing toward a climax, and he sensed that the truth, when it emerged, would be as devastating as it was inevitable. Sherlock Holmes, as always, was a picture of composed determination. He sat in their shared sitting room, his small notebook open, his gray eyes scanning the pages with a precision that belied the complexity of the puzzle. The ledger, the letters signed C, the pearl earring, the syringe, and the cryptic journal entries, all were pieces of a mosaic that Holmes was steadily assembling. "Good morning, Hastings," he said, his voice calm but charged with purpose. "Today we reach a turning point. The killer's mask is slipping, and a single revelation will crack the facade wide open." Before Hastings could reply, Inspector Japp appeared at the door, his face drawn with fatigue, but his eyes alight with news. "Holmes, we've had a breakthrough," he said, holding up a small, sealed envelope. "One of my men found this in the fireplace of the servants' quarters. Half burned but still legible. It's addressed to Mary, and it's in Charles Wycliffe's hand." Holmes took the envelope, his fingers deftly extracting the singed paper within. The note was brief but chilling. "Mary, you must tell no one what you saw. Meet me at the ruins at midnight, or all is lost. C." Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph. "This, Inspector, is no red herring. Mary was a witness to something critical, and this note confirms her connection to Charles' fate. The ruins are the heart of this mystery." Hastings frowned, his mind racing. "But Holmes, if Mary met Charles at the ruins, why was she found dead on the servants' stairs? And where is Charles?" Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, Hastings. The answers lie in the human heart, its passions, its fears. Today we shall press those hearts until one breaks." The morning was spent in preparation for a confrontation. Holmes, convinced that the household was teetering on the edge of revelation, requested a private meeting with Clara Wycliffe, whose fragile state and cryptic claims of seeing shadows had marked her as a key figure. Accompanied by Dr. Langston, Clara was brought to the library, her pale face and trembling hands betraying her terror. Holmes, with his characteristic blend of gentleness and authority, seated her before the fire, his voice soft but probing. "Mademoiselle Clara," he began, "you have seen things in this house that you dare not speak of. The shadow in the garden, the note under your pillow. These are not figments of your imagination. Tell me, what do you know of Charles's troubles? What did you see?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. I saw him," she said, her words halting. "Charles, in the
Someone, a man, I think, but it was dark. They were near the chapel path, and Charles looked afraid. I wanted to tell Papa, but Charles made me promise to stay silent. He said it was dangerous." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze steady. "And Mary? Did she know of this argument?" Clara nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. She overheard them too. I saw her watching from the kitchen window. Later, she told me she was worried for Charles, but she wouldn't say why. Then she was gone." The room fell silent, the weight of Clara's words settling like dust. Dr. Langston, his face pale, interjected. "Monsieur Holmes, Clara's nerves are delicate. This questioning is too much for her." Holmes's eyes fixed to the doctor, sharp as a blade. "And yet, Doctor, her words are the first clear light in this fog of deceit. You were in the house that night, were you not? Did you see this argument?" Langston's tic worsened, his hands fumbling with his medical bag. I was in my room, as I've said. I saw nothing." Holmes's smile was thin. "Your nerves, Doctor, betray you as much as Clara's. We shall speak again." As Clara was led away, Holmes turned to Hastings.
The girl has given us a vital piece, Hastings. Charles was seen arguing with a man, likely our C, and Mary witnessed it. Her death was no accident, but a desperate act to silence her. The killer is close, and they are growing reckless. The afternoon brought further revelations. Holmes, with Japp's assistance, searched Charles's room once more, focusing on a locked drawer in his desk that had been overlooked. Using a small tool, Holmes pried it open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon. These, unlike the others, were not signed C, but bore the initials V.H. Victor Harrow. The letters were damning, detailing a scheme between Harrow and Charles to siphon funds from the Wycliffe estate, disguised as payments to a fictitious merchant. The tone grew increasingly tense, with Harrow demanding more money and threatening to expose Charles's role in the fraud. The final letter, dated the day before Charles's disappearance, read, "You cannot back out now, Charles. Meet me at the ruins, or the family will know everything." Holmes's eyes gleamed. Here, Hastings, is the motive. Charles and Harrow were partners in deceit, but Charles, perhaps overcome by guilt, sought to end it. Harrow, fearing exposure, took drastic measures. Confronting Harrow in the drawing room, Holmes presented the letters, his voice desperate.
Creditors were hounding him. I didn't harm him, I swear. He vanished before I could meet him at the ruins. Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. And Mary? Did she discover your scheme? Did you silence her with laudanum? Harrow staggered back, his eyes wild. No, I had nothing to do with her death. I cared for Charles, despite everything. I've been trying to find him, to make things right. The room erupted in chaos as Eleanor, who had been listening from the doorway, rushed forward, her face contorted with rage. You liar, she cried. You drove Charles to ruin. If he's dead, it's on your head. Sir Reginald, trembling with emotion, stepped between them. Enough, he roared. My son is gone, and now you tear this family apart with accusations. Monsieur Holmes, I beg you, end this nightmare. Holmes raised a hand, his presence commanding silence. The nightmare, Sir Reginald, is nearing its end. Mr. Harrow, your lies have crumbled. Miss Wycliffe, your silence has protected no one. The truth is emerging, and it will not be denied. As the household dispersed, shaken by the confrontation, Holmes drew Hastings and Japp aside. Harrow is guilty of fraud, but not necessarily of murder, he said softly. His desperation suggests fear, not guilt. The true killer is still among us, hiding behind these emotional outbursts. Tonight, we shall set a trap to draw them out. Dinner was a somber affair, the household barely speaking as the weight of Harrow's confession hung heavy. Holmes, ever watchful, noted the glances exchanged between Eleanor and Dr. Langston, the way Mrs. Thorne's hands trembled as she served the meal, and the haunted look in Clara's eyes. The air was thick with suspicion, and Hastings felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. As they retired to their rooms, Holmes outlined his plan. We shall stage a scene, Hastings, he said, his voice low. A rumor will be spread that I have found Charles's body in the ruins, hidden beneath the third stone. The killer will panic, and in their panic, they will reveal themselves. Hastings, his heart pounding, nodded. It's a risky plan, Holmes. What if the killer strikes again? Holmes's smile was resolute. Then we shall be ready, my friend. The little grey cells are poised, and the truth will not escape us. As the night deepened, Ravenstone Hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Hastings, gripping his revolver, felt the weight of the moment, knowing that the next hours would bring the mystery to a head or plunge them deeper into darkness.
Chapter 9. The Trap.
The 9th day at Ravenstone Hall began with a deceptive calm, the Dartmoor mist swirling outside like a living thing, cloaking the manor in an eerie silence. Captain Hastings, whose nerves were frayed by the relentless tension and the emotional upheaval of the previous day, felt a knot of anticipation in his chest. Victor Harrow's confession of financial deceit, Clara's tearful revelations, and the mounting clues, the ledger, the letters, the syringe, had brought the mystery to a boiling point. Sherlock Holmes's plan to set a trap for the killer loomed like a storm on the horizon, and Hastings could sense that the truth was within reach, though at what cost he dared not imagine. Holmes, as ever, was a model of composure, his gray eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a predator closing in on its prey. He stood in their shared sitting room, adjusting his tie with meticulous care, his small notebook tucked into his pocket. "Good morning, Hastings," he said, his voice steady but charged with purpose. "Today, we spring the trap. The killer has been clever, but their desperation will betray them. The little gray cells, they are ready." Hastings, gripping his coffee cup, frowned. "This plan of yours, Holmes, spreading a rumor about Charles's body in the ruins. It's bold, but dangerous. What if the killer lashes out?" Holmes's smile was faint but resolute. "Then we shall be prepared, my friend. Fear drives the guilty to act, and action reveals the truth. We must move swiftly." The morning was spent putting Holmes's plan into motion. He instructed Inspector Japp to gather the household in the drawing room under the pretense of a significant development in the case. Japp, though skeptical of Holmes's theatrical methods, complied, his constables stationed discreetly at the hall's exits. As the household assembled, Sir Reginald, pale and stooped, Eleanor, her composure brittle, Clara, clinging to Dr. Langston, Victor Harrow, sullen and defensive, and Mrs. Thorne, her face a mask of stoic resolve, Holmes took his place before the fireplace, his presence commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and measured, "I have grave news. This morning, my investigations at the chapel ruins uncovered a disturbing discovery. The body of Charles Wycliffe, hidden beneath the third stone. He was murdered, and the evidence points to someone in this room." A gasp rippled through the group, followed by a chorus of denials. Sir Reginald staggered, clutching his cane, his face ashen. "My son? Dead?" he whispered. "It cannot be." Eleanor's hands flew to Langston's shoulder, while the doctor's tic grew more pronounced, his hands trembling. Mrs. Thorne remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, but her knuckles whitened around the edge of her apron. "The body," Holmes continued, "bears marks of violence, and the evidence links it to Mary's murder. I urge the guilty party to confess now, before the net closes." The room erupted in chaos, accusations, tears, and protests. Holmes, unmoved, dismissed the household, instructing Japp to keep them under watch. As they dispersed, he drew Hastings and Japp aside. "The trap is set," he said softly. "The rumor of Charles's body will provoke the killer to act, either to retrieve evidence or to silence another witness. Tonight, we shall watch the ruins and the passageway." Japp rubbed his chin. "You're certain there's no body, Holmes? That was a risky bluff." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A necessary one, Inspector. The killer believes their secret is safe, but our announcement has shaken them. They will move, and we shall be ready." The afternoon was spent in preparation. Holmes and Hastings returned to the chapel ruins.
where Holmes examined the third stone once more, ensuring no new disturbances had occurred. He placed a small marker, a twig arranged in a precise pattern, to detect any tampering. Back at the hall, Japp stationed his men at key points, while Holmes and Hastings took up positions in the passageway to the servants' stairs, hidden in the same alcove they had used before. The hours crept by, the house settling into an uneasy quiet. At 1:45, a faint creak echoed through the passage, followed by the soft tread of footsteps. Holmes's hand tightened on Hastings's arm, signaling silence. A figure, cloaked in shadow, moved swiftly toward the door to the garden, their movements cautious but hurried. Holmes and Hastings followed, keeping to the shadows, their steps muffled by the damp grass. The figure made straight for the chapel ruins, pausing at the third stone. As they knelt, Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the night. "Stop, my friend. Your actions betray you." The figure froze, then turned, revealing Dr. Langston's pale face, his eyes wild with panic. In his hand was a small spade, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. "Monsieur Holmes," he stammered, I was only checking the stone. I heard your announcement and thought, perhaps there was evidence you missed." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "Evidence, Doctor? Or were you seeking to destroy it? The ledger, the letters, the syringe, all point to a scheme you were part of. Charles discovered it, and Mary overheard. Did you silence them both?" Langston's tick became a violent twitch, his hands shaking as he dropped the spade. "No, him. And Mary, she was nosy, always listening. I warned her to stay quiet, but I didn't poison her." Holmes stepped closer, his voice low and commanding. "Then who did, Doctor? Your fear betrays you. You know more than you admit." Langston's resolve crumbled, his shoulders slumping as he sank to the ground. It was Harrow," he whispered. "He and Charles were in it together, stealing from the estate. When Charles wanted out, Harrow threatened him. I saw them arguing at the ruins, the night Charles vanished. I don't know what happened after, but Mary, she must have seen something too." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "And the note under Clara's pillow? The syringe in the garden?" "I don't know," Langston cried. "I swear, I only wanted to protect myself. I've been trying to find Charles's journal, to destroy it before it ruined me." Holmes signaled to Japp, who had followed with a constable. "Take Dr. Langston into custody, Inspector. He is not our killer, but he is complicit in the scheme that led to these crimes." As Langston was led away, sobbing, Holmes turned to Hastings. "The trap has caught a fish, Hastings, but not the one we seek. Langston's confession confirms the financial scheme, but the murder of Mary and the fate of Charles lie with another. Harrow is a likely candidate, but we must be certain. The killer is watching, and they will strike again if we falter." Back at the hall, the household was in an uproar, Langston's arrest sending shockwaves through the ranks. Eleanor, her face pale, confronted Holmes in the drawing room. "You've ruined him!" she cried. "Dr. Langston was trying to help us, and now you've branded him a criminal." Holmes' expression was impassive. "Mademoiselle, Dr. Langston's ruin is of his own making. He was blackmailed by Charles, as were others, I suspect. The question is, who acted to silence them?" Dinner was a tense, silent affair, the household barely touching their food. Holmes, as always, observed every glance, every tremor. Hastings, seated beside him, felt the weight of the trap's success and its failure. They had caught Langston, but the true killer remained at large, hidden among the faces around the table. As they retired to their rooms, Holmes paused at the window, gazing out at the moonlit moor. "The net is closing, Hastings," he said softly. "The killer is cornered, and tomorrow we shall force their hand. The demon of the ruins will be unmasked, and the truth will stand revealed." Hastings, his heart heavy with dread, nodded. The trap had been sprung, but the hunt was far from over, and Ravenston Hall's shadows seemed darker than ever. Chapter 10. The Reveal.
Tension of the past week felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Dr. Langston's confession the previous night had exposed a web of blackmail and deceit, but the true killer, responsible for Mary's murder and Charles Whitcliffe's disappearance, remained at large. Sherlock Holmes's trap had shaken the household, and Hastings sensed that the moment of truth was upon them. Holmes, as ever, was a study in calm precision, his grey eyes gleaming with the quiet triumph of a mind that had unravelled the puzzle's final threads. He stood in their shared sitting room, adjusting his tie with meticulous care, his small notebook tucked into his pocket. "Good morning, Hastings," he said, his voice steady and purposeful. "Today we shall lay bare the heart of this mystery. The demon of the ruins is no phantom, but a human soul driven by greed and fear. The little grey cells have spoken, and the truth will now be heard." Hastings, gripping his coffee cup, frowned. "You sound awfully certain, Holmes. Have you truly pieced it all together? Langston's confession pointed to Harrow, but something tells me it's not that simple." Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Simplicity, Hastings, is the refuge of the lazy mind. The truth is complex, but it's logical. Tonight we shall gather the household and reveal the killer. But first we must confirm one final detail." The morning was spent in quiet preparation. Holmes, accompanied by Hastings and Inspector Japp, returned to the chapel ruins, where the third stone had yielded so many clues. Holmes examined the area once more, his magnifying glass glinting as he studied the ground. Near the stone, he found a faint impression in the earth, a partial footprint, its tread matching the boots worn by Thomas, the groundskeeper. "Curious," Holmes murmured. Thomas claimed he was not near the ruins the night Charles vanished, yet this print suggests otherwise. Back at the hall, Holmes requested a private meeting with Thomas, who was summoned to the library. The groundskeeper, a burly man with a weathered face, stood uneasily before Holmes, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Mr. Thomas," Holmes began, his voice calm but piercing, "you've maintained that you saw nothing unusual the night Charles Whitcliffe disappeared. Yet your footprint was found at the chapel ruins near the third stone. Care to explain?" Thomas's face reddened, his eyes darting to the side. I patrolled the grounds, sir. I might have been near the ruins, but I didn't see Mr. Charles, I swear it." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "And the night Mary was murdered, your cottage is close to the kitchen garden, where the syringe was found. Did you see anyone there?" Thomas shook his head vehemently. "No, sir, I was asleep. I know nothing of syringes or murders." Holmes dismissed him with a nod, but his expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "The pieces are falling into place,
Hastings," he said as Thomas left. "Thomas is not our killer, but he's hiding something. His fear is palpable, and it points to the heart of this affair." As evening approached, Holmes instructed Japp to gather the household in the drawing room for what he called the final reckoning. The air was thick with tension as the residents assembled. Sir Reginald, his face etched with grief. Eleanor, her composure fraying. Clara, pale and trembling. Victor Harrow, sullen and defiant. Dr. Langston, now under guard but allowed to attend. Mrs. Thorne, her stoic facade cracking. And Thomas, his eyes downcast. Japp's constable stood at the doors, ensuring no one could leave. Holmes stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his presence commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "the shadow over Ravenston Hall is about to be dispelled. 2 crimes have haunted this house. The disappearance of Charles Wycliffe and the murder of Mary the maid. They are connected by a single thread, a secret so dangerous that it drove someone to kill. Tonight I shall reveal the truth." He paused, his grey eyes sweeping the room, noting every reaction. "Let us begin with Charles Wycliffe. He was a man in trouble, drowning in debts from his reckless life in London. But Charles discovered something far more dangerous, a scheme to defraud the Wycliffe estate. The ledger revealed payments to an unknown sea, sums disguised as legitimate expenses. Charles, seeking to end the scheme, confronted those involved, and it cost him his life." A murmur rippled through the room. Sir Reginald's hands trembled on his cane. "My son murdered," he whispered. Holmes nodded. "Indeed, Sir Reginald. Charles was killed, and his body hidden. Though not at the ruins as I claimed, that was a ruse to provoke the killer. The true hiding place is closer to this house, but we shall come to that. First, let us consider Mary. She was a loyal servant but curious, and she overheard something she should not have. An argument, perhaps, or a confession. She was poisoned with laudanum, her death staged to look like suicide, but the bruise on her wrist and the syringe in the garden betrayed the truth." Holmes turned to Victor Harrow. "Mr. Harrow, you were Charles's partner in the fraud, siphoning funds from the estate. The letters in Charles's desk confirm it. When he threatened to confess, you panicked, did you not?" Harrow's face flushed with anger. "I told you, Holmes, I didn't kill him. Yes, we took money, but Charles vanished before I could confront him."
Stairs. Your presence at the ruins. You were searching for Charles' journal, hoping to protect the family's honor. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears.
I wanted to save Charles,"
She said.
"He told me about the blackmail, but not who was behind it. I thought the journal might hold the answer."
Holmes nodded, then turned to Mrs. Thorne, whose stoic demeanor had given way to a faint tremor. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice soft but relentless, "you have served the Wycliffe family for 30 years. Your loyalty is unquestioned, but it is also your motive. The ledger's payments to C were not to Charles, nor to Harrow, but to you, Constance Thorne. Charles discovered your secret, did he not? A secret tied to the family's past, one you would kill to protect." Mrs. Thorne's face drained of color, her hands clutching her apron.
No, you're wrong,"
she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Holmes pressed on, his voice rising with certainty. "You were blackmailing Sir Reginald, using a scandal from years ago. Perhaps an indiscretion, perhaps a crime. Charles found the ledger and confronted you. You lured him to the ruins, where you killed him, hiding his body in the old well behind the chapel. Mary overheard your argument with Charles, and so you poisoned her, staging her death to look like suicide. The note under Clara's pillow was your attempt to keep her silent, for she, too, had seen you near the ruins. The room was silent, the air thick with shock. Mrs. Thorne's shoulders slumped, her eyes filling with tears.
I had no choice,"
she whispered.
"Sir Reginald's father. He wronged me years ago. I took what was owed to me and Charles threatened to ruin everything. I didn't mean for Mary to die. She was too curious, always listening. I only wanted to protect the family."
Sir Reginald staggered, his face a mask of horror. "Constance, you? After all these years?" Holmes's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "You protected yourself, Mrs. Thorne, at the cost of 2 lives. Inspector Japp, take her into custody." As Japp's constables moved forward, Mrs. Thorne collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The household watched in stunned silence, the weight of the truth settling over them like a shroud. Holmes turned to Hastings, his voice low.
The demon of the ruins was no myth, Hastings, but a woman driven by vengeance and fear. The little grey cells have prevailed. As the household dispersed, shaken by the revelation, Hastings felt a chill that lingered long after the fire had died. The truth had been uncovered, but Ravenstone Hall would never be the same. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The 11th day at Ravenstone Hall broke with a mournful quiet, as though the manor itself were in mourning for the truths laid bare the previous evening. The Dartmoor mist, ever gloom, but the atmosphere within the house remained heavy with sorrow and disbelief. Captain Hastings, who had witnessed the dramatic unmasking of Mrs. Thorne as the murderer of Charles Wycliffe and Mary, felt a strange mix of relief and melancholy. The mystery was solved, the killer apprehended, yet the cost of the truth weighed heavily on his heart. Sherlock Holmes, however, was as composed as ever, his grey eyes calm but reflective as he sat in the library, sipping a cup of tea and reviewing his notebook. The meticulous Belgian detective, whose little grey cells had unraveled the tangled web of deceit, seemed almost serene, as though the resolution of the case had restored a sense of order to his world. Hastings, seated opposite him, could not help but marvel at his friend's detachment, though he knew it masked a deep understanding of human nature. "Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, setting down his cup with a precise clink. "The storm has passed and the shadow over Ravenstone Hall has lifted. Yet I sense you are troubled. The truth, it is not always a comfort, is it?" Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll say, Holmes, to think that Mrs. Thorne, of all people, a woman who served this family for decades, could commit such atrocities, it's almost too much to bear. And poor Sir Reginald, losing his son, and now this betrayal. How does one recover from such a blow?" Holmes's lips curved into a faint, contemplative smile. "One does not recover, Hastings, but one endures. The human heart is resilient, even in the face of treachery. My task is not to heal, but to reveal. The rest is for time and courage to mend." The morning was spent tying up loose ends. Inspector Japp, ever the diligent policeman, oversaw the formalities of Mrs. Thorne's arrest. She had been taken to the village jail, her confession recorded in full, a tale of long-buried resentment against the Wycliffe family, sparked by an injustice done to her by Sir Reginald's father decades ago. She had used her position as housekeeper to siphon funds, disguised as payments to C, her own initial, Constance, until Charles discovered the truth. Fearing exposure, she had lured him to the chapel ruins, where she struck him with a heavy stone and hid his body in the old well. Mary, who had overheard their argument, became her next victim, poisoned with laudanum to ensure her silence. Holmes, accompanied by Japp and Hastings, led a team to the well behind the chapel, where Charles's body was indeed found, confirming Mrs. Thorne's confession. The grim discovery brought fresh grief to the household, particularly to Sir Reginald, who collapsed in tears upon hearing the news. Eleanor, her composure shattered, vowed to care for Clara.
Residents gathered, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow. Sir Reginald, a broken man, Eleanor clinging to Clara, Victor Harrow subdued but defiant, Dr. Langston still under scrutiny for his role in the blackmail scheme, and Thomas the groundskeeper, whose silence had hidden his own fears. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes began, standing before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "The tragedy of Ravenstone Hall is concluded, but its lessons remain. Charles Wycliffe's death and Mary's murder were born of greed and vengeance, rooted in a secret that festered for decades. Mrs. Thorne, trusted by this family, betrayed that trust, driven by a wound from the past. Yet she was not alone in her deceit." He turned to Harrow, his gaze piercing. "Mr. Harrow,
Your role in the financial scheme was significant. You profited from the estate's funds, and though you did not kill, your greed set this tragedy in motion. You will face justice for your crimes." Harrow's shoulders slumped, but he said nothing, his defiance spent. Holmes then addressed Dr. Langston. "Doctor, your silence protected your own secrets, but it endangered others. Your complicity, though not murderous, is a stain upon your conscience." Langston's tick twitched violently, but he nodded, his eyes downcast. Holmes continued, his voice softening as he addressed Eleanor and Clara. "Miss Wycliffe, Mademoiselle Clara, you have suffered greatly, but you are not without fault. Your silence, born of loyalty or fear, allowed the darkness to grow. Speak always, when truth demands it." Finally, he turned to Sir Reginald. "Sir, your family's legacy is one of honor, but also of hidden sins. The past cannot be undone, but the future is yours to shape. Protect those who remain." Sir Reginald, his voice barely a whisper, nodded. "Thank you, Monsieur Holmes. You have saved us from further ruin, though the cost is heavy." Holmes inclined his head, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "My work is done. The truth is its own reward, though it brings no joy." As the household dispersed, Holmes drew Hastings aside, leading him to the library for a private reflection. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows on the walls, and Holmes settled into an armchair, his fingers steepled before him. "Hastings," he said, "you have seen the human heart laid bare, its passions, its flaws. What do you make of it?" Hastings sighed, staring into the flames. "It's a grim business, Holmes. Mrs. Thorne's vengeance, Harrow's greed, Langston's cowardice, all of it led to such senseless loss. I wonder if justice is enough, when so much has been broken." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a rare warmth. "Justice, Hastings, is not a cure, but a necessity. The little grey cells, they seek order in chaos, truth in deception. We cannot undo the past, but we can ensure it does not repeat."
Nodded, struck by the simplicity of Holmes's words. "You're right, of course. But I can't help feeling for this family. Sir Reginald, Eleanor, Clara. They'll carry this for the rest of their lives." Holmes's smile was faint but kind. "And they will endure, as all must. Our task is complete, Hastings. Tomorrow we return to London, where other puzzles await." The remainder of the day was spent preparing for their departure. Japp, grateful for Holmes's brilliance, promised to handle the legal proceedings, while the household began the slow process of healing. Eleanor took charge of Clara's care, vowing to shield her from further harm. Harrow and Langston, under police supervision, awaited their fates, their roles in the scheme exposed. As evening fell, Holmes and Hastings took a final walk across the moor, the chapel ruins looming in the distance like a silent witness to the tragedy. The air was crisp, the mist parting to reveal a sky dusted with stars. Holmes paused, gazing at the ruins, his expression contemplative. "The demon of the ruins," he said softly, "was no supernatural force, but the darkness within a human soul. We have banished it, Hastings, but others will rise. The world is full of such shadows, and it is our duty to face them." Hastings, moved by his friend's words, nodded. "You've done it again, Holmes. You've brought light to the darkness. I only hope I can keep up with you in the next adventure." Holmes chuckled, a rare sound that warmed the cold night. "You do admirably, my friend. Now, let us return to the hall. The moor has no more secrets to yield." As they walked back to Ravenstone Hall, the weight of the case lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet resolve. The mystery was solved, the truth revealed, but the scars it left would linger. Holmes, ever the guardian of logic, seemed content,
his mind already turning to the next challenge. For Hastings, the memory of Ravenstone Hall would remain, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the power of truth to set it free. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The 12th day at Ravenstone Hall unfolded under a sky that seemed to mourn with the household. The Dartmoor mist settling once more like a shroud over the manor's blackened stones. The revelation of Mrs. Thorne's crimes, her murder of Charles Wycliffe and Mary, driven by a decades-old grudge, had left the residents in a state of stunned grief. Captain Hastings, whose heart ached for the shattered Wycliffe family, found himself grappling with the bitter aftertaste of justice. The truth had been uncovered, but the wounds it exposed would not heal easily. Sherlock Holmes, ever the embodiment of calm precision, sat in the library, his small notebook closed for the first time.
Could one remain so detached in the face of such tragedy?
"Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, his voice steady but tinged with a rare softness. "The case is closed, the demon unmasked. Yet I sense you are troubled by the aftermath. The truth, it is a heavy burden, is it not?" Hastings sighed, settling into an armchair opposite Holmes. "Heavy indeed, Holmes. I can't stop thinking about Sir Reginald, Eleanor, and poor Clara. To lose Charles, and then to learn their trusted housekeeper was the cause. It's more than anyone should bear. And Harrow and Langston, caught up in their own schemes, it's all so senseless." Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled before him. "Senseless perhaps, but not without cause. The human heart, Hastings, is a labyrinth of motives. Greed, vengeance, fear. Mrs. Thorne's actions were born of a wound long festered, and Harrow and Langston's complicity sprang from weakness. My task is to uncover these motives, not to judge them. That is for others." The morning was spent in the final preparations for their departure from Ravenstone Hall. Inspector Japp, ever diligent, had coordinated with the local authorities to ensure Mrs. Thorne's transfer to a more secure facility in Exeter, where she would await trial. Victor, Harrow, and Dr. Langston, implicated in the financial scheme, remained under police supervision, their fates to be determined by the courts. The household, meanwhile, moved through their routines like ghosts, their faces etched with sorrow and disbelief. Holmes, ever methodical, requested a final walk through the house to ensure no detail had been overlooked. Accompanied by Hastings, he revisited Charles's room, the servants' stairs, and the passageway where so many clues had been found. In the kitchen, he paused to examine the spot where the laudanum bottle had been discovered, his magnifying glass glinting as he studied the floor. "The orderliness of this house," he remarked, "is a facade, Hastings. Beneath it lies chaos, carefully concealed. Mrs. Thorne was adept at maintaining that facade, but her secrets could not withstand scrutiny." Their inspection was interrupted by Eleanor Wycliffe, who approached with a hesitant step, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Holmes," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I wish to thank you. You've brought us the truth, though it's a bitter one. I should have spoken sooner. About Charles's fears. About the ledger. Perhaps I could have saved him." Holmes's expression softened, his grey eyes meeting hers with a rare warmth. "Mademoiselle, regret is a heavy companion, but you must not carry it alone. You acted out of loyalty to your family, a motive I understand, if not condone. Your task now is to protect Clara and rebuild what returned to Holmes.
She's stronger than she seems, isn't she? To face all this and still think of Clara, it's remarkable." Holmes's smile was faint but approving. "Strength, Hastings, often lies in the quiet moments, not the loud ones. Miss Wycliffe will endure, as will Sir Reginald, though their path will be difficult."
The afternoon saw a visit from Sir Reginald himself, who sought out Holmes in the library. The old man, his face lined with grief, leaned heavily on his cane, his voice barely above a whisper. "Monsieur Holmes," he said, "you have done what I asked, though the cost is greater than I could have imagined. My son is gone, my household betrayed. How does one move forward from such ruin?" Holmes regarded him with a steady gaze. "Sir Reginald, the ruin is not complete. You have your daughter and niece, and the truth, though painful, has freed you from the shadow of deceit. We build with them, and let the past be a lesson, not a chain." Sir Reginald nodded, his eyes glistening. "You are wise, Monsieur Holmes. I shall try. Thank you, and you, Captain Hastings, for your compassion." As Sir Reginald left, Holmes turned to Hastings. "Compassion, Hastings, is your gift, as logic is mine. Together, we make a formidable pair, do we not?" Hastings chuckled, the first genuine smile he had managed in days. "I suppose we do, Holmes, though I'll be glad to leave this place and its ghosts behind." The evening was spent packing their belongings, the somber mood of the house tempered by the knowledge that justice had been served. Japp joined them for a final discussion, his moustache twitching with a mix of admiration and exasperation. "You've done it again, Holmes," he said, shaking his head. "Unraveled a knot I'd have never untied, but I'll be glad to see the back of this case. Too many secrets for my liking." Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "Secrets, Inspector, are the currency of crime. It is our task to spend them wisely." As night fell, Holmes and Hastings took a final walk across the moor, the chapel ruins looming in the distance like a silent sentinel. The air was crisp, the stars piercing the thinning mist. Holmes paused, gazing at the ruins, his expression contemplative. "The demon of the ruins," he said softly, "was no more than a woman's vengeance twisted by time. Yet it reminds us, Hastings, that the past is never truly buried. It lingers, waiting to be uncovered." Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting to the Wycliffe family. "And what of them, Holmes? Will they find peace?" Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Peace is a journey, not a destination. They have the..."
The guardian of logic walked with a quiet satisfaction, his mind already turning to the next puzzle. Hastings at his side felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever mysteries awaited them in London. Their bags packed, they prepared to depart the following morning, leaving behind a house forever changed by the truth. The demon of the ruins had been vanquished, but its echoes would linger, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the power of reason to restore it. Chapter 13. The Final Threads. The 13th day at Ravenstone Hall dawned with a fragile stillness, the Dartmoor mist parting just enough to cast a pale, ethereal light over the manor's weathered stones. The resolution of the mystery, Mrs. Thorne's confession to the murders of Charles Wycliffe and Mary, had brought a semblance of closure, but the air remained heavy with the aftershocks of betrayal. Captain Hastings, whose heart still ached for the fractured Wycliffe family, felt a quiet resolve as he prepared for their imminent departure. The truth had been uncovered, yet there were still threads to tie, questions lingering in the shadows of Ravenstone's corridors. Sherlock Holmes, ever the epitome of precision, was already up and dressed, his suit immaculate, his gray eyes reflecting a mind still engaged with the case's finer details. He sat in the library, his small notebook open, reviewing the clues that had led to the unmasking of the demon of the ruins. To Hastings, his friend's calm demeanor was a marvel, a testament to the power of logic to impose order on chaos. "Good morning, Hastings,"
Holmes said, closing his notebook with a soft snap. The case is solved, yet there are always loose ends to secure. Today we shall ensure no shadow remains to haunt this house. The little gray cells, they demand completeness. Hastings, settling into an armchair, nodded. I suppose you're right, Holmes. But it's hard to shake the feeling that there's more to this tragedy. Some detail we've missed. Mrs. Thorne's confession explained the murders, but what about the fear that gripped this household? Clara's visions, Thomas's silence. There's still something unspoken, isn't there? Holmes's smile was faint but knowing. Perceptive, Hastings. The human heart is never fully revealed in a single confession. There are indeed threads left to weave, and we shall address them before we depart. The morning began with a visit from Inspector Japp, who arrived with a weary but satisfied air. Holmes, you've outdone yourself, he said, his mustache twitching with reluctant admiration. Mrs. Thorne's locked up tight, and Harrow and Langston are facing charges for their part in the fraud. But I've got a nagging feeling we're missing something. That note about the shadow at midnight, it still bothers me. Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming. A valid concern.
Point to a secondary truth. Let us speak with Thomas, the groundskeeper. His reticence has been conspicuous. Thomas was summoned to the library, his weathered face tense as he stood before Holmes. The groundskeeper's hands fidgeted, his eyes avoiding the detective's piercing gaze. Mr. Thomas, Holmes began, his voice calm but authoritative. You have maintained your ignorance of the events surrounding Charles's death and Mary's murder. Yet your footprint at the chapel ruins and your proximity to the kitchen garden suggest otherwise. What did you see or hear that you have not told us? Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his voice low. I didn't want to get involved, sir. The night Mr. Charles disappeared, I was patrolling the grounds, like always. I saw him head to the ruins, and Mrs. Thorne was with him. I heard raised voices, arguing, but I didn't stay. I thought it was family business, not my place. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And Mary, did you see her that night? Thomas hesitated, then nodded. Aye, sir. She was in the kitchen, late, washing dishes. I saw her looking out the window toward the ruins, like she was watching something. I didn't think much of it till she was found dead. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. And the note about the shadow at midnight. Did you leave it? Thomas shook his head vehemently. No, sir, I swear it. I don't know who left it, but I've seen no shadows, only my own fears. Holmes dismissed him with a nod, turning to Hastings and Japp. Thomas is no killer, but his silence protected Mrs. Thorne, if only by omission. The note, I suspect, was another of her attempts to divert us, though its true author may yet be significant. The afternoon was spent addressing the household's lingering fears. Holmes requested a private meeting with Clara, who was brought to the library by Eleanor. The young girl, still frail and pale, clutched her sister's hand, her eyes wide with apprehension. Holmes, with a gentleness that surprised Hastings, knelt before her, his voice soft. Mademoiselle Clara, he said, you have seen shadows and heard whispers, but they are no longer a threat. The demon of the ruins has been unmasked, yet I sense you know something more. Tell me, what haunts you still? Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. I saw Mrs. Thorne that night in the garden. She was carrying something heavy wrapped in a cloth. I thought it was just supplies, but now I know it was Charles. And the note under my pillow, it frightened me so. I thought the demon would come for me next. Holmes's expression softened. The demon was no spirit, mademoiselle, but a woman driven by vengeance. You are safe now. Speak always when fear grips you, for silence gives power to shadows.
Hastings. Clara's fear was real, but it was born of observation. Her testimony confirms Mrs. Thorne's actions, but it also suggests the household
knew more than they admitted. The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly, as Holmes and Hastings conducted a last inspection of the servants' quarters. In Mary's room, tucked behind a loose floorboard, Holmes found a small diary, its pages filled with the maid's neat handwriting. The entries detailed her growing unease about Mrs. Thorne's late-night movements and her suspicions about the payments in the ledger. One entry, dated the day before her death, read, "Mrs. T met someone at the ruins, Mr. Charles, I think. They argued, and she looked angry. I fear for him, but who can I tell?" Holmes closed the diary, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. Mary was the key, Hastings. Her curiosity made her a target, but her diary confirms the truth. Mrs. Thorne acted alone in the murders, but the household's silence enabled her. As evening approached, Holmes gathered the household one final time in the drawing room. Sir Reginald, Eleanor, Clara, and the remaining staff stood in somber silence, their faces reflecting the toll of the past days. Holmes, standing before the fireplace, spoke with a calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the tragedy of Ravenston Hall is at an end. Mrs. Thorne's crimes have been exposed, and justice will follow. But let this be a lesson. Secrets, when buried, grow into shadows that destroy. Speak the truth, always, for it is the only shield against such darkness." Sir Reginald, his voice breaking, nodded. "You have saved us, Monsieur Holmes. Though the cost is heavy, we shall rebuild, for Clara and Eleanor's sake." Holmes inclined his head. "That is all I ask, Sir Reginald. My work is done." As the household dispersed, Holmes and Hastings prepared for their departure the following morning. Japp, joining them for a final discussion, shook Holmes's hand with grudging respect. "You have a knack for this, Holmes," he said. "I'd have been chasing shadows without you." Holmes's smile was faint. "Shadows, Inspector, are but the absence of light. Shine the light of reason, and they vanish." That night, as the moor lay quiet under a starlit sky, Hastings reflected on the case. The demon of the ruins had been no supernatural force, but a human heart twisted by vengeance. The truth had set Ravenston Hall free, but its scars would remain. Holmes, ever the guardian of logic, seemed content, his mind already drifting to new challenges. For Hastings, the memory of this case would linger, a testament to the power of truth and the cost of its revelation. Chapter 14. The Departure. The 14th day at Ravenston.
Sunlight to illuminate the manor's blackened stones, casting long shadows that seemed less menacing than before. Captain Hastings, whose heart had been heavy with the tragedy of Charles Wycliffe's death and Mary's murder, felt a quiet relief as he packed his belongings. The unmasking of Mrs. Thorne as the killer had brought justice, but the emotional toll on the Wycliffe family lingered, a reminder of the fragility of trust. Sherlock Holmes, ever the paragon of precision, stood in their shared sitting room, his suitcase neatly packed, his grey eyes reflecting a calm satisfaction. His small notebook, now filled with the meticulous details of the case, lay closed on the table, a silent testament to the triumph of his little grey cells. To Hastings, his friend's composure was both a comfort and a marvel, a beacon of order in the chaos of human passion. "Good morning, Hastings," Holmes said, adjusting his tie with a deft hand. "The time has come to leave Ravenston Hall. The mystery is solved, the truth revealed, and our work here is complete. Yet I sense you are still troubled by the echoes of this case." Hastings sighed, folding his coat over his arm. "You're right, Holmes. I can't help but think of Sir Reginald, Eleanor, and Clara. They've lost so much. Charles, their sense of safety, their trust in those closest to them. Justice has been served, but it feels like a hollow victory. Holmes' smile was faint, but understanding. Justice, Hastings, is rarely a balm for the heart. It restores order, not happiness. Our task was to uncover the truth, and that we have done. The Wycliffes must now find their own path to healing. The morning was spent in final farewells. Inspector Japp, who had overseen the transfer of Mrs. Thorne to Exeter and the pending charges against Victor Harrow and Dr. Langston, joined Holmes and Hastings for a last discussion in the library. His moustache twitched with a mix of relief and admiration as he shook Holmes' hand. "You've done it again, Holmes," he said. "This case was a devil of a mess, but you cut through it like a knife. I'll be glad to get back to London, though. Less gloom there." Holmes inclined his head, his eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. "The gloom, Inspector, is but a reflection of the human soul. We have dispelled it here, and London awaits with its own shadows." Before departing, Holmes requested a final meeting with the Wycliffe family. Sir Reginald, Eleanor, and Clara gathered in the drawing room, their faces marked by grief, but also a flicker of resolve. Sir Reginald, leaning heavily on his cane, spoke first, his voice steady despite his visible exhaustion.
Truth, no matter how painful. You have your family, Miss Eleanor, Mademoiselle Clara. Hold them close and let the past teach, not torment. Eleanor, her eyes red but resolute, stepped forward. Monsieur Holmes, you've given us a chance to rebuild. Clara and I will care for each other and for Papa. We'll carry on for Charles's sake. Clara, clinging to her sister's arm, managed a small nod. Thank you, Monsieur Holmes, she whispered. I'm not afraid anymore. Holmes's gaze softened, a rare warmth breaking through his usual reserve. Courage, Mademoiselle Clara, is the greatest weapon against fear. You have it in abundance. As the family withdrew, Holmes and Hastings made their way to the hall's great oak doors, where their hired motorcar awaited. The servants, Grayson the butler and Thomas the groundskeeper, stood by, their faces reflecting a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Thomas, in particular, seemed relieved to be cleared of suspicion, though his silence during the investigation had weighed heavily on him. As they climbed into the car, Hastings glanced back at Ravenstone Hall, its towers looming against the sky. It's a strange thing, Holmes, he said, his voice low. This place feels alive, as though it's watching us leave. I'll not be sorry to see the last of it. Holmes chuckled softly, settling into his seat. A house, Hastings, is but stone and mortar, given life by the minds within. Ravenstone Hall will heal, as its people do. Our work is to ensure that healing begins with truth. The car rumbled along the winding lanes of Dartmoor, the moor stretching out like a vast, silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded. Hastings, gazing out the window, felt a pang of melancholy for the Wycliffes, but also a renewed admiration for Holmes's brilliance. You know, Holmes, he said, your ability to see through the fog of lies, it's nothing short of extraordinary. How do you do it, time and again? Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet pride. It is simplicity itself, Hastings. The little grey cells, they observe, they analyze, they connect. Every clue, every gesture, every silence, it speaks to those who listen. The demon of the ruins was no supernatural force, but a human heart driven to desperation. We have silenced it, and that is enough. As the car neared the village, where they would catch the train to London, Hastings reflected on the case. The ledger, the letters signed C, the pearl earring, the syringe, the journal in the ruins, all had pointed to Mrs. Thorne's guilt, but it was Holmes's relentless logic that had woven them into a coherent truth. The cost had been high, 2 lives lost, a family broken, but the shadow over Ravenstone Hall had lifted, leaving room for hope, however faint. The train station was a bustle of activity, a stark contrast to the somber quiet of the manor. As they boarded the train, Holmes settled into his seat.
Expression one of quiet anticipation.
"London awaits, Hastings," he said. "New puzzles, new shadows. Are you ready?" Hastings grinned, his spirits lifting. "With you, Holmes? Always." As the train pulled away, carrying them back to the familiar chaos of the city, Ravenston Hall faded into the distance, its blackened stones a memory of mystery solved. The demon of the ruins was no more, but the lessons it left behind of truth, trust, and the resilience of the human spirit would linger in Hastings's heart, a testament to the power of reason and the enduring partnership of two unlikely friends. Chapter 15. The Return to London. The 15th day marked the final chapter of Sherlock Holmes and Captain Hastings' sojourn at Ravenston Hall, a departure that carried with it both the weight of a mystery solved and the lingering sorrow of its cost. The Dartmoor landscape, as the train rattled away from the village, seemed to bid them farewell with a parting of the mist, revealing a horizon touched by the faint glow of a winter sun. Hastings, seated opposite Holmes in their first-class compartment, gazed out the window, his thoughts a tangle of relief and reflection. The unmasking of Mrs. Thorne as the murderer of Charles Wycliffe and Mary had brought justice, but the scars left on the Wycliffe family would not soon fade. Holmes, as ever, was a picture of serene precision, his grey eyes scanning a newspaper with detached interest, though Hastings knew his friend's mind was still sifting through the details of the case. The small leather notebook, now a chronicle of the Ravenston affair, rested in his pocket, a silent testament to the triumph of his little grey cells. To Hastings, Holmes' calm was both a comfort and a mystery, a reminder of the Belgian detective's unyielding devotion to logic over emotion. "Good afternoon, Hastings," Holmes said, folding the newspaper with a precise snap. "The moor recedes and London calls. Yet I sense you carry Ravenston Hall with you still. The heart, it clings to such tragedies, does it not?" Hastings sighed, leaning back in his seat. "You've hit the nail on the head, Holmes. I can't stop thinking about Sir Reginald, Eleanor, and Clara. They've lost so much: Charles, their trust, their sense of home. Mrs. Thorne's betrayal cut deep, and I wonder if they'll ever find peace." Holmes' smile was faint but thoughtful. "Peace, Hastings, is a fragile thing, built not on the absence of pain, but on the courage to face it. The Wycliffes have that courage, though they may not yet know it. Our task was to give them truth, and that we have done. The rest is theirs to shape." The journey to London was punctuated by moments of quiet reflection. Hastings, ever the empathetic soul, found his thoughts drifting to the key moments of the case. The pearl earring on the servants' stairs, The syringe in the kitchen garden, and the journal hidden in the chapel ruins. Each clue had been a thread in the tapestry of deceit, woven together by Holmes' relentless logic. The revelation of Mrs. Thorne's motive, a decades-old grievance against the Wycliffe family, had been both shocking and tragically human, a reminder of how vengeance could fester in even the most loyal heart. As the train rattled through the countryside, Holmes broke the silence, his voice low but clear. "Hastings, you have been a steadfast companion in this affair, as in all others. Your heart, it balances my mind, and together we uncover what neither could alone. Tell me, what lesson do you take from Ravenston Hall?" Hastings considered the question, his gaze fixed on the passing fields. "I suppose it's that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, always find a way to the surface. Mrs. Thorne thought she could hide her past, but it consumed her and those around her. And yet, I can't help but feel for her, in a way. She was wronged long ago, and that wound drove her to madness." Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. A perceptive observation, my friend. The human heart is a paradox, capable of great loyalty and great betrayal. Mrs. Thorne's crime was born of both, and it is our task to understand, not to judge. The little grey cells, they seek only the truth, not the morality of it. The conversation turned to lighter matters as the train neared London. Holmes, with a rare touch of humour, remarked on Japp's begrudging admiration, predicting the inspector would regale his colleagues with tales of the case, though likely claiming more credit than due. Hastings chuckled, the tension of the past weeks easing slightly in the warmth of their camaraderie. As they approached Paddington Station, the bustle of the city began to replace the sombre quiet of the moor. The platform was a chaos of porters, passengers, and steam, a stark contrast to the oppressive stillness of Ravenstone Hall. Holmes and Hastings disembarked, their suitcases in hand, and hailed a cab to their Baker Street lodgings. The familiar sights of London, the gaslit streets, the catter of hansoms, the hum of life, felt like a return to normalcy. Though Hastings knew the memory of Ravenstone would linger. At 221B Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson greeted them with her usual warmth, a tray of tea and biscuits waiting in their sitting room. "Welcome back, gentlemen," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I trust you've solved another mystery to keep the papers buzzing." Holmes' smile was enigmatic. A mystery solved, Mrs. Hudson, and a shadow dispelled. "Now, if you'll excuse me, little corner of the world." Holmes, sorting through a pile of letters, glanced up with a rare warmth.
Indeed, Hastings, the world is full of shadows, but here, in the light of reason, we face them. Rest now, my friend, for new puzzles await.
As evening fell over London, the city's lights twinkling through the fog, Hastings reflected on the case. The demon of the runes had been no supernatural force, but a human heart twisted by vengeance and despair. Mrs. Thorne's crimes, Victor Harrow's greed, Dr. Langston's cowardice, all had been laid bare by Holmes's brilliance. The Wycliffe family, though scarred, had a chance to rebuild, guided by the truth they now possessed. Holmes, seated at his desk, began to hum a soft tune, his fingers tapping rhythmically as he opened a letter. The sound, so rare from the meticulous detective, brought a smile to Hastings's face. The mystery of Ravenstone Hall was behind them, but the partnership of Holmes and Hastings, logic and heart, reason and compassion, would face countless more. For now, in the quiet of Baker Street, they were home, ready for whatever shadows the future might bring.